Welcome to Big Picture Walks, Stay-at-Home Edition. In this episode, I would like to talk about the future of the human civilization and the human species itself. So it's a big question, it's a big topic. I hope you'll enjoy it. Thinking about the year 2100, for example, what should we expect? What should we expect for the global economy? What should we expect for our own species? The approaches that have been taken put our future somewhere on these two axes. Okay, so first of all, for the global economy, the economy must end up somewhere between a catastrophe and technological singularity. So either you can have, a disaster, a permanent decline of the human civilization, or perhaps you would have a secular stagnation, so that basically growth will stop eventually. You may have balanced growth, which has been observed for like the last two centuries, or you could have accelerating growth. Well, and again, you can have singularity. Now, what about our species? Here we should put our future on this axis, somewhere between extinction and immortality. And so if you say that, currently we have some level of life conditions, some quality of life, some levels of average life satisfaction among the Homo sapiens, these conditions can either go up or down. And ideally, we would solve all the problems relating to aging and illnesses and all the problems that affect us in our daily lives. On the other hand, if everything goes completely wrong, we may end up dead. So far we are mortal, which means we're all gonna die, but we better do the best we can so that we don't all die on the same day, so that we avoid extinction of our species. There is a saying attributed to Niels Bohr: it's difficult to predict, especially the future. Nothing can be more obvious than that. You will never have data on the future, you only have data about the past. And so the only thing we can do is to somehow predict into the future by extrapolating what we've seen in the past. And that always is subject to potential errors. I think the best way to build a prediction for a far future, which stretches beyond the short term of 3 years or so, is to try and see the secular trends that have been shaping our economy and our lives for millennia and centuries and decades, and then see how these trends may evolve in the future. Are they bound to continue, or perhaps should they stop? Or perhaps new trends could emerge. In the previous episodes, I described my favorite way of looking at past data in assessing the level of development. And I would like to look at this sort of decomposition once again and try and think about the possible evolution of all the dimensions of economic development in the future. So back to the hunter-gatherer era, the measure of development was habitat capacity. Well, this is a variable for which no further dynamic can be potentially observed unless we colonized further planets, which, is not totally unlikely, but I would not put a big probability for this happening before the year 2100. Now, so habitat capacity, that's probably a dimension that is bound to stagnate. Next, agricultural era measure of development could be global population. Again, global population will probably plateau until the year 2100. So far, population is growing, but this is more like the late stage of the demographic explosion that we've been observing since the scientific and then the Industrial Revolution. And there are some countries in the world, like notably in sub-Saharan Africa, that went on that train much later. So they started their demographic transition also much later. And all this means that they still have some way to go. and so their demographic transition is not yet over, but it probably will eventually be over. And United Nations predict that population will probably plateau until the year 2100. GDP. What do we know about GDP? Well, global GDP, well, of course, it's growing, and it's been growing relatively fast, doubling every 20, 30 years on average. So GDP seems to be growing fast, although if you look at frontier nations, at most developed countries, like notably the USA, there are some signs of an ongoing slowdown in GDP growth. So you have some authors, like notably Robert Gordon, who demonstrate in tedious detail that actually GDP growth in the US is slowing down for the last few decades. So there is a lot of catch-up to be done in the rest of the world compared to the US or Western Europe. But once this is done, maybe there's going to be a plateau. Probably not before 2100, but who knows. Now, the digital era measure of development would be data processing capacity, the Moore's law. There is evidence that the Moore's law in its original form is already down, that the growth rate in like CPU power is already slowing down. You may imagine that looking more broadly, computing power will not grow as fast in the future. We just don't know. Maybe there will be a further breakthrough that would accelerate further the pace of data computing, communication, and storage. We just don't know. But clearly, this is the exponential growth pattern that emerged most recently and had the greatest growth rate. We just don't know how long it's gonna persist. The bottleneck of development in the current digital era is not in hardware but in software. So it may well be the case that the key development that is needed to accelerate data processing capacity and our overall ability to exert control on the world, to maximize our local control, is through artificial intelligence. Maybe it is that once we'll have much better algorithms, much better tools that could be much more efficient in using the existing computing power of digital devices, that will be a huge acceleration in development. Last but not least, there may also be a further technological revolution. Economic growth has been accelerating each time the world has witnessed a technological revolution. What if there will be further technological revolutions in the future? In economics, most of the discussion these days about the long-term prospects for the global economy is whether we should expect a secular stagnation. So basically the two camps that there exist are the emergence of a secular stagnation and the, let's say, more optimist camp that would say that balanced growth could go on for a prolonged period of time and maybe even accelerate. And there's also this fringe that would suggest a singularity in economic development. When you place your discussion in this frame, then you kind of avoid discussing the prospect of a catastrophe, and you kind of also avoid the discussion of a possible singularity. You rather place your bets somewhere in the middle ground, which is, of course, a risk-averse thing to do. You would probably think that the likelihood of extreme events is not that huge. Although, as I argued already, technologies are a double-edged sword, and we are climbing up a ridge that has huge precipice, and in fact, extreme outcomes may be not that unlikely altogether in the end. So I would say that the framing of the discussion in the literature is probably too narrow. Maybe even more extreme outcomes should also be considered. This said, I would like to place a few arguments against the view of a secular stagnation that's being put forward, for example, by Robert Gordon. So first of all, I would say I don't like the concept of the fourth industrial revolution. I think it's a misnomer. It's a misnomer because the third and the fourth of the four industrial revolutions are actually digital revolutions. So, okay, you can split the industrial revolution into two phases. First, the steam engine phase, and then the electricity and combustion engines phase. And that's fine. That's fine if you like it. But then you can also split the digital revolution into two phases. Let's say the digital computer would be the first phase, and the internet would be the second phase. So, in my perception, the error you make by calling the digital revolution like a third and fourth industrial revolution is that you're actually missing the point that this is a brand new technological revolution that creates a brand new dimension of development. And it has effects for GDP, of course, but these are second-order effects. And first-order effects are in a completely new dimension. So to me, speaking of the fourth industrial revolution or saying that, the impacts of computers on GDP are slowing down and therefore we should expect secular stagnation, is like, looking at the 17th century physics and like through the lens of the agricultural era mindset and say, okay, you have all these fantastic discoveries, but how does this help feed more people? Eventually, to a certain extent, it will help feed more people, and it has helped feed more people, but it was not the main dimension in which progress was taking place. So, so to me, the digital revolution just creates a brand new reality, and as a side effect, also feeds to GDP growth. But thinking about secular stagnation because the observed growth rates in GDP tend to be slowing down for the last decade or so, to me is too short-sighted, too narrow as an analysis. What about singularity then? If I'm saying that I don't quite believe the prospect of a secular stagnation, do I endorse balanced growth, or maybe a catastrophe? Or maybe do I endorse singularity? Yeah, in fact, before we proceed, let's discuss a few definitions of singularity, because this is not a uniquely defined term. There has been a few approaches to this concept. Perhaps the most famous singularitarian, the most famous proponent of technological singularity is Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil says that to him, singularity is a future period during which the pace of technological change will be so rapid, its impact so deep, that human life will be irreversibly transformed. Robin Hanson speculates that within the next century, a new mode of development may appear with doubling time measured in days, not years. If you think about the prospects for a further technological revolution, this is a prophecy that cannot be dismissed. The second definition is that singularity will occur once we create superhuman artificial intelligence. Artificial general intelligence will be sufficiently adaptive and able in a vast array of tasks that it will outperform humans broadly in everything we do, which means it will take over the decision-making process, because it will also outperform us in our decision-making process. And it will be more efficient in pursuing its goals than we are in pursuing ours. So, the prospect of an AI takeover, that's clearly another view of singularity. Now, the third approach to singularity is the existence of a vertical asymptote in the level of development, like this. If you have a moment in time where your measure of development Q goes to infinity, a vertical asymptote like that would be a singularity. What do I think about these definitions? I think that they are not, of course, not equivalent, and the third one is a clear one to be dismissed. If your level of development includes also something physical, something that requires energy, then by the laws of thermodynamics, you cannot use infinite energy. So if you have an essential part of your level of development, which is material, you cannot have a vertical asymptote, and so thermodynamics rule this sort of singularity out. But the first two definitions are also not equivalent either. In the end, I think, though, it's hard to imagine a singularity without a superhuman artificial intelligence. You may have some great developments, but if you look at the world today, where the bottleneck of development is in software, human thinking is extremely slow compared to computer thinking, compared to the data processing in digital machines of today. And human communication is even more horrible, in comparison. And so if you want to think about a situation where this bottleneck is resolved, it's hard to imagine this bottleneck being resolved, even though the decision-making, the thinking, and the communication would, to an essential extent, involve the humans. To me, this is rather unlikely, and I think, therefore, that a singularity, in the sense similar to what Ray Kurzweil meant, should involve artificial general intelligence. In my view, the future of the global economy and the human species depends crucially on, first, whether we'll be able to achieve substantial progress in creating artificial intelligence. Secondly, whether there will be a new technological revolution in the future, in the coming decades, whether quantum or nanotechnological, biotechnological, we don't know, but clear breakthrough in our programmable hardware. Third, it also depends on degree of returns to R&D, and in particular in the case of R&D on artificial intelligence and the rate of cognitive reinvestment. So how easy it will be for new ideas to be found, in particular in new ideas related to intelligence itself, and also how easy it will be for the artificial intelligence itself to reprogram its code. We don't know this, and I think this is a parameter that would importantly affect the prospects for the future. And last but not least, fourthly, whether some disaster would happen in the meanwhile. As I said, technologies, especially the modern, advanced, multi-purpose technologies, are double-edged swords, and they can also have unintended side effects. Some of them pertain to our environment, so global warming is clearly an issue. For example, some of them pertain to our mind. Psychological side effects of digital technologies are also a clear issue. And something unexpected can always go wrong. It also must be said that the future for the global civilization, for the global economy, does not have to coincide with the future for the humans as a biological species. In this singularity scenario, you could have a superhuman artificial general intelligence that will continue our civilization, will just find the existence of our species as a risk, and it may decide and then pursue its decision, given its superior intelligence, and simply eradicate our species from the world and continue the civilization as we designed it without us being able to observe it. Also, with fast and relentless progress in automation, it may be that the global economy will accelerate in its growth, but the average life conditions of an average person on Earth would actually deteriorate. We already are seeing that the degree of inequality is increasing over the last decades, and probably a part of that can be attributed to the substitution of human cognitive work by computer software. Economic growth does not have to go hand in hand with improved life conditions among the broad world population. The distribution of effects among the human population is to a large extent an institutional issue, an issue of convention, of our own decisions. It's not technologically determined. So if you ask me what is my prediction for the year 2100, I would say it's hard to predict, especially the future. So how can I know? But if I were to place my bets, I would say I don't believe in a secular stagnation. I don't believe in degrowth. I don't believe in people being able to purposefully, settle on a certain steady state without wanting to reach beyond it. To the contrary, I would say that the probability of extreme events will only go up. And that would mean singularity, and that could also mean a disaster. I don't know, but I think the future is going to be interesting, to say the least. That's all for today. Thank you. Bye-bye. Please like, please share, subscribe, comment. Nobody's commenting my content. I don't know. Perhaps you have some opinions. This is a contentious issue. What about the future? What should we expect? Please comment. Thanks. If you look at the Ray Kurzweil's definition, to me, actually, it's rather opaque. It's not too clear in the end, because what does it mean that technological change will be so rapid and it impacts so deep that human life will be irreversibly transformed? In a way, already farming has irreversibly transformed human life. People were hunter-gatherers, and later they could not be hunter-gatherers anymore. They had to do completely different things, and so their lives have been irreversibly transformed. And the same can be said about the internet, the steam engine. Okay, so there's been quite a few moments in our history which have irreversibly transformed the human life. But I guess, okay, I'm just picking on words. What is more important here is that the pace of change will be so rapid that we could not live the way we live now. If you will end up in a world that would have a doubling period for whatever measure of technological development you have, like GDP or like data transmission or whatever, if that pace would double every 2 months or something like that, how could you make plans for the summer? If it's 6 months until the summer, so you have 3 doublings already. The level of development will be 8 times bigger. It will be a completely different world by the next summer, and that would irreversibly transform the way we live.